Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiest Hour Live, where no matter where you are right now, if things are wonderful or if things are incredibly challenging, we strive to make your life just a little bit better. It is a pleasure to welcome you all here today, and we want to thank the Krame Center for Mindful Living for their generous sponsorship of the Happiest Hour Live. Please register for future events at thecramecenter.org. My name is Dan Lerner.
And I am Dr. Schlechter.
And together for the past 8 years, we have taught the science of happiness to over 6,000 students at New York University. We decided to do this because a few weeks ago, we began teleteaching our NYU students. You may be an NYU student. You may have a student at home who is not able to be on campus right now due to the COVID pandemic. But we expected it to be slightly awkward to teach 500 students on a Zoom chat. And we discovered it was anything but that. We discovered it was actually really remarkable. Immediately, students started raising their hands, getting involved, really saying how wonderful it was to see each other. And we thought, let's bring what it is that we do, the science of happiness, to a broader audience. And to be clear, we don't just teach happiness. Alan here is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. He will focus on things like stress and anxiety, other challenges to well-being, much of which we have right now. And together we bring positive psychology as well. A few things just to know if this is your first time. The chat box is open. It is wide open, and we absolutely encourage you to chat throughout. We're going to be talking for about 30 minutes with our guest today in conversation, and then the last 30 minutes will be questions and answers. But we strongly encourage you to ask questions throughout. If something comes up, bring it up. We want to have a big group conversation. Feel free to have conversations in the text box with other folks who are here too. It's a community rather than just 3 people on stage. So again, thanks for being here. Now, we always begin with the same question, which is this. And we'd love to know what your thoughts are on this. If this show was exactly what you needed right now, if it's exactly what you're hoping for in this hour, what would the outcome be for you? And if you want to go ahead and put it in there in the text box, it'd be terrific to see. Coping mechanisms. Hang on, there's hope, a little bit of inspiration, some self-caring. Smiles. Who doesn't? Less angry at the federal government. That's the one thing we cannot promise you today.
Well, it seems like most people would like the winning numbers to Mega Millions. And that is something we can give you. But we're going to give it to you at the end of the talk. So you have to listen to everything we say. At the end of the talk, we will have all of those numbers.
All right. Dan McCauley, what's up? Great to see you. So many wonderful people here, by the way. There are parents here, right? Mr. Kaufman, Ms. Schlechter, hello.
My dad's talking, not knowing he has to unmute himself.
I'm looking at my mom right now. She is on the call. Hello.
All right. Wonderful. So Alan, what are you seeing here? Like what's hitting you here?
Well, I love the one, balance school and life. I think there is a work-life balance. There is an idea that these things are separate, which I think this pandemic has shown us that they're not, that we work and we life, and it's how do we live with all of it. I think this pandemic has hit home with the idea that resilience is not just about springing back with the kind of long-term stress that we're under. It's also going to be about finding growth during times of challenge. It's going to be about thinking about concepts like transcendence and self-actualization, which is why we're so excited to have Scott on.
Scott is a perfect host today. He's a perfect guest today. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. I mean, we've had so many different topics so far, and I appreciate you sort of framing it that way, Alan, because there are going to be some serious challenges. And for some folks out there, the question is there a place for transcendence? Is there a place for self-actualization? So we get kind of the man when it comes to these two topics. And so allow me to introduce the fellow we're talking about, guest of honor, the man of the hour, literally the hour, Scott Barry Kaufman. Scott and I met in the most wonderful way. It's got to be about five years now. We were sitting at a table over dinner at the very end of a table, being pretty much ignored, but ignored by the best people, which was at the head of the table was Martin Seligman. It was at his home. And I finally turned to Scott. This guy's sitting across from me, all decked out in a leather jacket. And I was like, who are you? And little did I know that he was this remarkable guy. He turned to me and said, well, I've just come to Penn. I am the scientific director of the Imagination Institute here at the University of Pennsylvania. And we started chatting, and he said he'd gone to Carnegie Mellon. He was a singer. And I said, oh, really? Who'd you study with? And he said, Mimi Lerner. I said, that's my mom. And so it turned out that he had studied voice with my mother. And it's interesting because we both sort of saw her as I saw her as a mother figure, understandably. And Scott was like, she was such a wonderful mother figure to me. And now we always refer to each other as a brother from another mother. So, he is about as close as I get to a human being to go along with Alan. And, aside from our friendship, it might be important to note that Scott is a truly remarkable scientist as well as human being. Scott actually ranks as one of the top 20 psychologists under 40 in the Best Schools Guide. He has been teaching the science of living well and creativity and the good life at Columbia University following his stint at University of Pennsylvania. Scott, for a guy who has just turned 40, has done some remarkable things in terms of his writing career as well. He's written numerous books, including Wired to Create, Unraveling the Mysteries of the Creative Mind, Ungifted, one of my favorite books, Ungifted, Intelligence Redefined, where he makes his argument for a more holistic, kind of individual way to assess strengths. And his latest book, which I happen to have right here, funny how that works, and if you can't see it here, it's right behind Scott, is Transcend, the new science of self-actualization. And we're going to talk all about that today. As we said, the question really is there a place for that? And we're going to assume there is. How do we get there? So Scott and I had talked, and he had asked me to ask you, wonderful folks, a quick question to kind of tee all of this up, to get a sense of where people are with the idea of self-actualization. So if you would, take the next 10 or 15 seconds just to think through this question, which is, what is the first thought that comes to mind when you hear the term self-actualization? And if you want to go ahead and put it in your text box but not hit enter yet, that's wonderful. But what is the first thought that comes to mind when you hear the term self-actualization? Go ahead and put it in. We'll cue you so everyone can hit at the same time. And go ahead and hit enter. Let's see what book people wrote. Learning, acceptance, Oprah, the best version of myself, purpose, peace, renewal, my best self, potential, being the best, fulfillment. How interesting. Self-help, realization, whole self, impossible to achieve. Mm-hmm. What strikes me is we have all these answers and almost none of them are the same. Scott, what are you seeing here? Oh, by the way, well, Scott, welcome. Welcome to the Happiest.
Thank you. I was enamored with your introduction. Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. Wow, I'm reading all of these responses. What great responses, and they're also different from each other. Fulfillment, art, that's an interesting one. Being me, letting go. The being me, letting go one is really interesting because Maslow did talk a lot about spontaneity as a really important part of this, which he distinguished that from impulsivity. So spontaneity is not the same thing as impulsivity. We can prepare ourselves as much as possible so that we are in the moment prepared for our best self to spontaneously emerge. But that might take a lot of work over the years in order to do that. So I really like that person said that. Curiosity, truth. beyond self. So the beyond self one is also really super interesting, right? Because that suggests that the transcendence might be a part of self-actualization, and that is certainly something that Maslow was working towards, a theory of transcendence the last couple of years of his life, where he argued that one cannot fully self-actualize without reference to other people, and we don't realize our full potential until we help others realize their full potential, you know? And he noticed there's two different types of self-actualizers: transcenders and ordinarily self-actualizing people who have maybe realized their talents, they've mastered something, but it's not impacting the potential of anyone else.
Scott, do you think it's worth it? You've mentioned Maslow's name a couple of times, and do you think it's worth giving a very brief summary of just who he is?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so many people may have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They may have seen the pyramid. Yeah, maybe they've seen it diagrammed on Facebook with toilet paper at the bottom, or battery, you know, Wi-Fi at the bottom, and then increasing level of needs. So that was a representation of a theory Abraham Maslow, a humanistic psychologist in the 50s and 60s, who really argued that the field of psychology at that time had ignored a lot of the higher possibilities of humankind. By focusing, like Freud focused on sexual and aggressive instincts, and the behaviorists focused on how we were just these mindless robots. And Maslow came along, and a whole cadet of humanistic psychologists arguing, you know, there's something to me, it means to be fully human that's different than it means to be a full turtle, for instance, or a full orangutan. You know, like there's something it means to be fully human that psychology has ignored. This is what the field of psychology should be about, but yet it's ignoring what that means. So I really deeply resonated personally with that whole perspective, and also discovered lots of things and misconceptions that people had about that pyramid. One being that he never drew a pyramid. That's one misconception. Yeah.
Huh. Where did that pyramid come from?
So it can be traced to the 60s, to organizational psychologists diagramming in a textbook. And it actually started off as a step ladder with the man at the top with a flagpole, self-realized. And it was always a man, of course. This is like, you know, late 50s, 60s, you know, sort of management world that they were living in at the time. And then that morphed from staircase into, I have seen probably the first ever depiction of the pyramid, and it's not a very beautiful depiction, but I think it was just this idea of this, you know, we climb some sort of mountain to the top. It was in line with the ethos at the time of competition and bottom line in organizational management. However, that couldn't be any farther from the spirit which Maslow proposed his theory. It was had a very different spirit.
Scott, I want to sort of jump to a subject that we've dealt with, I'd say in each talk. And I think about a lot when I think of Maslow, because one of the things that I've always admired about Maslow is he had a very disturbed childhood in many ways. And like a lot of the really great thinkers on well-being, out of his challenges and his struggles, he grew into this person who loved humanity and wanted to help humanity learn how to love itself and grow. And that idea of how we overcome our challenges and our difficult moments is actually an essential part of the process. And every 139 people on this call, we are all experiencing challenges right now. And so to talk about how the science of self-actualization fits into overcoming challenges, could we talk about that?
Well, absolutely. You know, Maslow was a developmental psychologist in a lot of ways, and a developmental psychologist at heart. And one thing that was misrepresented was this idea that life is some sort of video game, you know, that you have these levels and you get to like the safety needs. And then if you can pass that level, then some voice from above is like, congrats, you've unlocked connection, you know, and then you move up to connection, you know, and then once you get to self-actualization, it's like it's some sort of achievement level. Maslow never wrote in his writings, never talked about it like that. He talked about human development as a constant 2-step forward, 1-step back dynamic. He has a great quote. He says, we can choose fear or we can choose growth. We have to keep choosing growth over and over and over again, because the fear option is always going to be prevalent in our lives. It's always going to be there. He was very clear that we target multiple needs simultaneously. And he also made it very clear that in order to grow, we often need to experience pain or experience a challenge of some sort that we overcome. He has a really interesting essay that's unpublished that I found, and I put it on Twitter. Where he talks about how humans, one of the human needs is actually the need to overcome challenge. Like, we would become, a lot of us are becoming bored. We're healthy inside quarantining and we're watching Tiger King all day, and yet we're still feeling there's something more for us in life. We feel a higher purpose than. Don't get me wrong, it was a great series, but we feel like there's there's something more. Humans innately are always striving for our things to master and things to we want to grow. There's a self-actualizing potential within us. And that was a core idea of the humanistic psychologist, right? And Carl Rogers, he called it the organismic valuing process, which is a very unsexy name. But another way of putting that is we have a self-actualizing tendency within us, each of us.
So I'm curious, where so much of what it is you're talking about here, I know from you because I've so familiar with the work, and we've been friends for a long time. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your connection to this kind of work. It's always seemed just so organic for you. And this book, as you were writing it, you really talked about it sort of, it felt incredibly natural, it felt incredibly right. It just felt like you. Can you talk a little bit about your connection to humanistic psychology and Maslow?
Oh, wow. And there's a lot to unpack there, because Maslow talked a lot about self-actualization is really finding the lock for your key, like finding what is the most perfect fit. People talk about, the GOAT of basketball, right? Who's the GOAT? Is it Michael Jordan or is it LeBron James? GOAT standing for greatest of all time. I've actually been thinking about, you're saying thank you because you think I just called you the GOAT?
I was literally like,
what does that mean?
I was like, why a GOAT? Why
greatest of all time.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I'm sure that a lot of folks, for a long time, I was like, I'm a huge sports fan. I'd see that and be like, why is that person a GOAT? I don't understand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, so I've actually been working on an article, is it narcissistic to want to be the GOAT? And I'm going to make the argument that it's not narcissistic, and that actually, and please tell me if this is too woo-woo for this crowd, but I think, or too Oprah-esque, but I really believe that there is nothing wrong with aspiring to being the greatest of all time version of you. And I think every single one of us can aspire to that. And it's not narcissistic to aspire to be the GOAT Scott. I want to be, I'll say it I said it. I want to be the GOAT Scott Barry Kaufman. And what I simply mean by that is, no, I'm not comparing myself to anyone else, but I'm saying I want to make sure that I do as much as I can so that whatever potentialities, whatever I have, is fully maximally making the impact on the world that it's having, and I feel alive to the maximum capacity that I'm alive while I'm alive, or else what's the point of being alive, right? Let's live it, So does that make sense?
Scott, that makes amazing sense. And all I asked in this call, when Dan said, what do you want out of this call, was a little inspiration, and that was it. So I'm gonna get off now.
Can I give you a lot of inspiration?
That was a pleasure. But that idea, and the idea of accepting whatever we're doing right now as our goal, that idea of, yes, there are many things that we cannot do right now. But on the days, and I've had some better days and I've had some worse days. But on those better days, at the end of the day, even though I've not done many things I would ordinarily do, I've thought I did what I did as well as I could have done it. And I love that idea.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So do you think,
Go ahead, Scott. Go ahead.
I was just gonna, because this, I'm testing the idea. Do you think it's a worthy article that I should
Oh
write?
yeah,
Do you think the idea makes sense?
absolutely.
Okay, cool. Okay.
People want to vote on it? Anyone?
Yeah.
You take a poll. 78% of people say they would read that article. Fantastic.
Because I've been
Multiple
debating whether or not.
explanation points.
Yeah, I've been debating whether or not, like, you know, you get a lot of haters, you get a lot of these annoying YouTube commenters, or they'll be like, well, no, actually, it is narcissistic, Scott, and you writing that article is narcissistic, you know, but that wasn't the
this
spirit
crowd.
of.
No, we curate our crowd, so we make sure anyone who says that we quietly bump out of the chat. No, please, your minds.
Okay,
Although someone just asked a question, which I think is super pertinent to clarify a few things. Someone asked a question about, so is it about external validation? How do we start to measure the GOAT, Scott, Barry Kaufman, or let's say the GOAT of ourselves? Right? Like, what are the measurements? And you in their book talk about some very specific kind of like buckets, if you will, or categories. Say these things are important when it comes to self-actualization. How do we start to make them our own? And what is it about external versus intrinsic validation?
I feel like there are multiple questions there.
There are like 7 questions. Is that a problem? Actually,
I suddenly got overwhelmed.
You feel there's 3 questions there? Is that too much
Focus.
to ask? Do you think I've asked too much? I can keep going.
No, because like you asked one, and then I was like, oh, I have an answer for that. And then you asked another one, and I was like, oh, I have an answer for that. Okay, just
extrinsic versus external versus internal measurements, validation.
Yeah, because it's a great question, and I saw someone in the chat right about that, right? Because like we go our lives, we can't disconnect ourselves from the fact, nor should we, that we're a social animal at the end of the day. Our self-esteem, it evolved in order to track its value based on what others think of us. So in a lot of ways, we're designed to be neurotic. Like, so if you're incredibly socially neurotic, please know that was thousands, millions of years of evolution that has got it, that serves an adaptive function in a lot of ways. But during the course of our individual existence, it's important to recognize that we can break out of that incessant tracking. We can, and this is the way I'd put it, we can decouple our own sense of worth from the social value and social feedback that we're getting. It's hard. It's a hard process. It takes a lot of growth. It takes a lot of reading of the humanistic psychologists, because they talked a lot about this, and I think they were really inspiring along this journey. But it's possible. It's possible to start to cultivate an inner compass, an inner sense of values, an inner sense of self-worth, a stable sense of self-worth, and what's called self-competence. That, I am a worthy human being, and I'm also a competent human being. I can make, I'm the owner, not the owner, but I'm the driver of my own life, and I'm good enough. And worthiness is different from narcissism. I've written articles distinguishing healthy self-esteem from narcissism. You can say, I'm good enough. Right now, everyone in this room can say that. I'm giving everyone permission to say that without saying, you don't have to say, it's not saying I'm the best, like I'm the greatest. I'm good, I'm worthy. I'm worthy to exist. And I think we can really practice that feeling, that stable sense of inner compass, so much that voice from others doesn't sway us to such a malleable degree.
So what does that kind of practice look like for folks to be able to sort of start right now? Like, what would you say?
I really like this book by, and I don't get any royalties for saying this, but I want to say a book recommendation other than my own, of course, is Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a it's actually, there's a curse word there, but yeah, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a but in that book, he actually brings in a lot of psychological science, showing lots of different ways in which, in order to really prioritize what matters most to us, we have to consciously choose what we don't care about, or whose opinion we don't care about. So for instance, Dan, I really care about your opinion. So this is not the subtle art of not caring, doesn't mean that you suddenly don't care about anything. That's called depression, right? The subtle, right? Okay. It's not like you suddenly are like, oh, I can't believe it. I'm going to stay in bed all day. No, the subtle art of not giving a beep is being like, you know what? There are people in my life that I really value them and I value their opinion, and they're good faith. They want to help me grow. But there are lots of requests that come my way. There are lots of people who will say things. There are trolls. They exist. And being the subtle art, it's an art, knowing how to really see and judge, is this person good faith or this person not good faith? And once you've decided that person's not good faith, letting it go. And I think that's a practice, and it's like a muscle. You know, we go to the gym to, well, you, Dan, don't need to go to the gym anymore. You're already jacked as can be, but, you know, but we can really build our muscle of discernment.
Scott, it does. And you're saying Dan is jacked. Did you also mean me? It's just,
well, I haven't hung out with you as much. I can't actually see anything below the neck right now.
So it's first of all, I am, for anybody, I'm enormously jacked, as Scott points out. But I think, Scott, you're bringing up such an essential subject, which is the idea of how relationships, which are our most highly correlated thing with our well-being, both in thriving and also in overcoming really difficult moments, and how that fits in to our self-actualization. And just to say what I heard you say was that idea of finding the people in your life who can actually help you along that path, that you need to have those people, and it's essential, and that there will be people, and by the way, that's happening right now, there will be people along the way actually who get in the way of that journey.
Absolutely. And being able to discern the two is so important. I've had friends. I mean, a good friend is someone that is wants you to grow as almost as much as they want to grow, you know, and or you know, and it's a need gratifying friend is what Maslow called it. And I've had friends, you know, in the past who've taken me aside and be like, "Yo, Scott, your Facebook posts are getting a little too self." You know, or like, you know, like you need to, you know, like chill a little bit. You know, there was a time like maybe 4 years ago, I used to get so excited because I was like, you know, starting from the bottom, you know, here we are, you know, that Drake song. When I first started out, you know, like every little like positive thing that happened to me, I'd be like, hey everyone, guess what? I got mentioned by this person, and you know, and I would have my friends. Well, I had a friend pull me aside, and be like, you know, Scott, that actually you look a lot cooler if you don't get so excited every time. So, and you know, and I knew that they cared about me, and it actually hurt me immediately, but then I was like, wait, no, they're right, you know. And then so part of growth is being open to experiences, being open to feedback, constructive feedback, being open to everything being in a constant state of change, living the growth-driven life, I call it. In the book, I talk about 3 different kinds. So some people you could be safety-driven. We found this, and I actually did this analysis with my colleague Reb Rebele. We did a factor analysis where we had 3 factors. There are people who tend to be security-driven in life. So they everything just has to be safe and secure all the time. They don't even like leaving their house, you know, like any sense of danger scares them. But they do feel safe, at least safe. Like driven life, there's the status driven life, and then there's the growth driven life. We found these 3 main clusters, and part of the growth driven life, you know, happiness didn't load that high in that factor, which was interesting. Happiness loaded more on the security driven life factor. And that status driven life was negatively related to happiness, in case you were curious about that one. But the growth driven life was correlated with meaning, with higher levels of meaning, higher levels of connections with others, higher levels of creativity, you know. And so you have to consciously decide at some point, what are you driven by? What kind of life do you want to live, you know?
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Is that, I mean, so what's the process for folks? Because there've been a couple of questions that are related, I think, including what does one do when one comes home and they don't necessarily feel like they reached their full potential that day? How do we sort of find that balance, right? Like, oh, I was like a 9.3. Am I cool with that? So how do we start to get comfortable with, oh, I've done something today that's moved me towards, or that would help with a correction. I'm not asking it's the right way, but Where do we
No,
get
you are. No, that's actually beautifully stated. So Maslow really did talk about human development as this 2-step forward, 1-step back dynamic. What we need to do right now in this moment is we all need to accept that that's how human growth happens. So you just accept that. And so I have moments I'll say stupid, awkward things, to people, and I'll beat myself up over it. I'll be like, darn it, Scott, that wasn't my best self. Like that, I can do better. But just the fact that you say I can do better, that you're living a growth-driven life. That's it. That's all there is to life. You don't have to. The beating up part is unnecessary, and I'm trying to work on that myself a lot. But recognizing there are givens of existence. We have looked at. I'll give you an example. We've looked at personality research. We want to know, is there any such thing as the perfectly moral person? Like, maybe that's a myth. Maybe we all have in our heads this idea that there exists some other kind of person than who you are. And it turns out, no, there isn't anyone else like you. So, okay, what I mean by that, because that's a weird thing to say. What I mean by that is you look at personality and you realize that even those who are real moral driven people, if you look throughout the course of their day, they have, all that means is that they tend to be 5 out of 5, 4 out of 5 on a scale, more frequency than on average than other people. But they still have the 1s, 2s, and 3s. So they still have a count of 1 in the 1 column. They did naughty things. Like if you follow someone who is the saint, if you actually follow them throughout the course of the day, which psychologists do this kind of stuff, they report, oh, that person snuck that chocolate in there. They didn't write about that on their Instagram account. So, and that's all personality is. And same thing with introversion, extroversion. There's no such thing as the perfectly introverted person who just, that's a myth that the introverted person hates people. No, they'll interact with people. It just means that frequency distribution wise, they tend to keep choosing the option of I'm good. I like this interaction, but I'd like to recharge more than the extrovert tends to do. But it doesn't mean that they don't like people or that they don't like social interactions. And same with extrovert. Dan, you're an extrovert, but I'm sure there are moments where you are like, well, there are, because you've told me, you're like, I'm exhausted.
I'm living in a house,
right?
with one family, one of whom is a 12-year-old who's bouncing off the walls. What I would give, don't tell anybody, what I would give for a little peace and quiet.
Exactly.
Yes,
and you're an extrovert, right? I mean, you still have a breaking point.
Huge. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I won't tell your wife and kid that. But anyway, but you see what I'm saying is we need to start thinking about humanity. That's why I'm a humanistic psychologist. That's what I identify as. That's what I go by. Some people ask me, but aren't you a positive? I'm like, no, I'm not a positive psychologist. I'm a humanistic psychologist. I'm not even always that positive, to be frank. But but meaning doesn't always have to be positive, does it?
No, it's so interesting. It's Scott. One of the things that we do in our course, and you know this, and you've taught a related course, is Alan and I second class of the semester, and the students I've seen a few who are on here right now, they can vouch for this. We kick off the class basically by saying, we lied to you. This course is called the Science of Happiness, but it should be called the Science of Well-being.
I know. I love that about your course.
Science of Well-being, we'd have 5 students instead of 500 students because like everyone wants happiness. What the hell is well-being? But well-being it includes meaning. It includes time when you're not exactly doing so well. Understanding that meaning is a component of flourishing, that engagement is a component of flourishing, that achievement is an accomplishment is a component. It doesn't mean it necessarily has to be fun or happy, right? There are all these wonderful components. So I love your distinction between humanistic and positive psychology.
And I love the course you teach with Alan. I've seen your syllabus, and it's like so exciting. So someone wrote in the comments, I'm so impressed with C. Kuhn wrote, I don't know if you can be self-actualizing while trying to attain perfection. I appreciate Karen Horney's concept of good enough. And I just want to say my latest speech reading has been the Adolescent Diaries. Oh, you can't even see it again because it's like, that's some sci-fi shit going on there. But what I'm trying to hold up is this book that says, I'm reading The Adolescent Diaries of Karen Horney. And I came across something she wrote New Year's Eve 1904 at the age of 18. At the age of 18, she wrote, this was her New Year's resolution. So this is going to immediately put everyone's New Year's resolutions to shame. She said, I want to learn how to listen to the delicate vibrations of my soul, to be incorruptibly true to myself and fair to others, to find in this way the right measure of my own worth. Holy cow. Wow. I think Karen Horney is one of the most underrated psychologists in the history of psychology. In addition to Abraham Maslow, I've been trying to bring back Karen Horney's work, and I'm going to be writing more articles about that. But she wrote that at the age of 18.
You know, one of the things you just talked about, the idea of being fair. And another one of the things I loved about Maslow was part of his idea of self-actualization involved being able to work through your prejudices, to actually live a life without prejudice. Yeah. And we're living in a world right now where actually prejudice is on the rise. And I would say ignorance is having this tremendous comeback. And could you talk about how Maslow saw and people stupidity. Developing, right, and stupidity? Could you see how Maslow thought about how we can develop that within ourselves?
Well, he talked about the cognitive needs. He talked about the need for exploration of, and in modern day language, my colleagues and I refer to as cognitive exploration, right? So you can have lots of behavioral forms of exploration, like extroverts love that stuff, you know, sex, money, drugs, power, all those things. Extroverts tend to like that. Those are,
hey, mister.
Wow.
Hey.
So well, this is what the research shows, you know.
Oh, wow.
In that case,
great. It's great.
You know, there's a whole cluster of things that social rewards go along with all these other things. Okay, they're all, but we've been able to distinguish a different dopamine pathway that is more in line with getting reward from cognitive stimulation, intellectual stimulation, and being able to explore multiple ideas and getting excited by the reward value of information, as separate from the reward value of other kinds of rewards, like I just mentioned, which are more ancestral. You know, they tend to get us more excited. Anyway, below. Sorry, the neocortex and subcortical structures. I'm talking about the subcortical structures, please. Okay, so, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep my composure here. But the idea of cognitive exploration, right, is so interesting. And Maslow talked about the cognitive needs, but modern day research is kind of confirming scientifically a lot of those ideas that Maslow was talking about, how we can strive for being like psychonauts, you know, being astronauts of the mind.
Psychonaut, like, I love that.
Yeah, if there are any psychonauts in this room, you know, but raise your hand, you know, because those individuals are just, the ego is not involved in the curiosity of the ideas. So you say something and someone says something that completely contradicts what you said, you don't react immediately with the, oh, but you're so wrong, you know, like who haters gonna hate, blah, blah. You say like, oh, interesting. Like, let me hear that more about that perspective. You can put on hold your own cognitive information that you thought, because ultimately your reward value there is not the ego, that's the other system that I was talking about, and that, you know, the sex, drug, rock and roll system, we call it. That's a separate system than the cognitive exploration system. That reward is increase in information. So that's all you care about. So you could be wrong. Your goal is to get the best information possible. So in order to do that, you have to recognize, well, I could be wrong. You know, let me hear what this person has to say. Maybe they have better information. You know, doesn't mean you have to accept it. Yeah.
You know, I just want to mention to everyone here, and I'm sure folks know you, but you know, I got to say, in a lot of ways, you just described one of the many reasons I love you so much. You know, Scott, you have this amazing ability to do just that, to listen and to and to want to know more, no matter what someone says to you. And, you know, we certainly had conversations where I've had a challenging conversation with somebody else, and when we've walked through it, your perspective has been really helpful. And also watching how you learn and grow and how you work with students has been remarkable as well. So, you know, I got to say, that's something I don't know if you take, how much you have, how much you identify with that. But let me say from the outside view, that's you like all day long, which is really beautiful. Yeah.
Thanks, Dan. That means so much to me. I really do get excited, you know, by ideas and just all sorts of even like taboo ideas, like topics, right? That like, oh, should we be talking about it? But like, no, let's talk about it. But you could do it in a compassionate way, you know. Fusing truth with love, in my view, is the greatest fusion one could have.
Wow, that is so beautifully said right now.
That's what I aspire to. That's what I aspire to, is that integration.
Truth and love.
So tell us, you know, right now, I mean, you're talking about some challenging stuff, right? Like the dark side, right? The things that are hard in life, the things that feedback that is difficult to take, and personalities that can be really challenging to interact with. So you've done quite a bit of work on that, especially for someone who's sometimes wrongly thought of as a positive psychologist. Can you talk a little bit about that dark side? Because a lot of what you talk about is how do we work with that? How do we address that, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think we need to define our terms. What do we mean? If I use the word dark side, and let's not do this exercise, but let's say hypothetically we then asked everyone, type in the box the first thought that comes to your mind when we say dark side.
Yeah.
They'd probably be all over the place. So in Todd Kashdan's way that he's talked about the dark side, it's your uncomfortable emotions. So anxiety, fear, insecurity, right? Those forms of dark side. Those forms are things that all the research shows, and it's been replicated over and over again, that the best way forward to growth is the opposite of what's called experiential avoidance. So I'm a big fan of like the acceptance commitment therapy approach, for instance. And I've had the founder of that, Stephen Hayes, on my podcast, and me and him did a role play on the podcast. People can go to the Psychology Podcast YouTube channel if they want to see me and Stephen Hayes. And I was like, hey, Stephen, I'm a loser. And I just eat chocolate all the time. And like, what should I do with my life? And he did this role play, and he's like, he's showing me the value of not avoiding those thoughts or experientially avoiding it. But what he argues for is psychological flexibility. And cultivating psychological flexibility means being able to, with an open-minded, open heart, embrace those sides of yourself, let those sides in, and in a loving way. You know, I mean, if you had a friend who said all those things, what's a better strategy? What's a better friend? Pushing that friend away immediately, because be like, yeah, you're right, you are a loser. I'm only friends with winners. Or embracing that friend and being like, get over here, give me a hug.
And you're using the word, a word that's come up a couple of times. I think we've all been doing it a lot these days, is having some compassion.
Yeah. Self-compassion. And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Yeah. I mean, self-compassion, and you also, if you extend it to a real person, one of the things that you talk about quite extensively is high-quality relationships, right?
Yeah, that's
and your point before, like when you try and decide what's healthy, what's not healthy, what you want to embrace, what you want to let go, what is a high-quality relationship for you?
A high-quality relationship is one where there's a mutuality there. So I've distinguished the need for belonging. I do in this book. I distinguish the need for belonging from the need for intimacy. And I don't see that distinction in the literature made nearly enough. And I think that's erroneous. So in the literature, a lot of people may try to get involved in things to have their need for belonging satisfied and still report being deeply unsatisfied. And they realized that that's not what they were that's what they thought they were searching for, but it wasn't. So we can satisfy our need of belonging by joining a group, joining, a gang, whatever identity that we can identify with, like, oh, we're accepted. But often when we join those sorts of things, we realize that the people don't care like the guru or the leader of that group you joined, they don't really care about you as a whole person. They care about you only to the degree to which you care about what they care about.
Mm.
So to me, a high quality connection is one where your whole self is appreciated by someone else. So that's an important distinction I make in my book.
Very interesting. And is there a way that you walk through nurturing that? I mean, how do you?
Well, listening is a big. Carl Rogers did a whole bunch of listening exercises.
Mm.
If you're trained as a therapist, right, Alan, you learn a lot of these listening techniques and good ways of asking questions. There's I love the literature on active constructive responding, right, by Gable and colleagues. You can learn these techniques. A lot of it is simply this, though, is just admiring a person for the sacredness of who they are, not trying to change them.
Mm.
Carl Rogers has a beautiful quote. He's like, if you look at a sunset, you don't think, oh, it's a nice sunset, but it'd be so much better if that corner there was moved a little bit to the right, and then I moved that up a little bit. We just admire the beauty of it. What if we treated our people in our lives like that? Maslow called it be love. Love for the being of others, being love.
Tina, Scott, I love what you're saying, first of all, but Tina just asked a wonderful question, which is that, and I think these things have come to the forefront right now that we've all been closeted away with each other, is how do you communicate to someone else that you don't feel your whole self is appreciated?
Well, hopefully if it's a good friend, you can say that. I mean, you can express how you feel about the situation. In some ways, that's kind of a test. Is there a high quality relationship here or not? Like sometimes we need to kind of test our relationships and see where they're going there. Is it a high quality? Some of our relationships we may find are not high quality.
Yeah.
There isn't a mutuality there. There isn't. If you tell the person, I feel like you only like me when I've noticed, for instance, that you only text me to say, how are you doing, when you're actually panicking and you want something from me. You never just say, how are you doing, because you just purely care about how I'm doing. Even if you could bring up that's an uncomfortable conversation. But if you could bring that up with someone and they're like, oh, wow, you're right. Like, I'm going to work on that because I care about our friendship. That's a high quality friendship.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it becomes, I think I often think of gratitude, the sticky glue of our relationships. But I think when we overcome those difficult moments, Dan and I were actually just sharing with our class the other day that after we wrote a book together and almost killed each other.
Actually, technically, I think we did kill each other.
We attempted to
come back.
But about a month later, we agreed to have a conversation, and we sat down and we talked about how we were hurt, and we became brothers. Or actually, Dan, I often think of us as parents because we had this book.
Are you the dad? Are we both? You're my dad. We're both parents. I'm sorry, both parents.
We're both parents.
Got it. Cool.
So, but I love that idea of putting the high quality relationships to the test.
To the test.
And there may be some that you decide to dump.
And that's good too. The subtle art of not giving a beep.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. But it does take that work, which is, it's not easy. So that's the stress, the anxiety, the strain of having that conversation. If you bring it up, and I give all credit to Alan for saying we need to talk. And I was like, yes, we do. So just the first step made all the difference. I was certainly thinking it. I didn't say it. I imagine he was thinking for longer than well before he said something. But just that first step, brought that.
Well, you need the time and the space for it is one of the really, difficult things. And I think people try to do them sometimes over text. I'm not sure how good Zoom is.
Text is not. Zoom is better than text.
Zoom is better than text. Some of them need to be in person. Some of them need to be, and that is one of the things, that is a barrier we're all living with right now, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, given the current situation, Scott, what have you seen? How do you see some of your work differently? Right? The work towards self-actualization, given the limitations we have, I imagine, you're on so much different media. The question must come up, what do I do? I mean, yes, we have Zoom, we can talk over Zoom. How do I foster high quality connections? What changed about how I deal with the dark side? What are, when I look at the factors in self-actualization, some I don't seem to be able to find meaning, right? How have things changed, and what are you doing how do you talk about that?
It's a great question, Dan.
How have things changed in light of
the put in under the pandemic, not able to leave, not able to do so many of the things that we associated with meaningful lives or quality relationships. Yeah.
Well, when I was writing this book, I didn't realize just how relevant it would be to this time. And I also thought I was going to be focusing more on the peak experiences aspect, but most of my discussions, rightly so, have been about what do we do now that we're all put into the bottom of the hierarchy of needs. It's not a triangle, but we're all trying to secure in the Kaufman sailboat model. We're all trying to, my new model of hierarchy of needs, we're all focusing on securing the boat, that we're not opening up our sails as fully as we can. And what I say to that is, in one sense, it makes us all realize how much we've all been in the same boat, even though we didn't or in the same ocean, even though we didn't realize it. I mean, we're all in our same boat going in our own direction, but we're all in the same ocean at the end of the day. And that ocean, a wave can come along that affects all the boats at once, right? Everyone was going in their own direction, and now they're all going in the same direction, and when that happens, it gives us a real reminder of just how many things that used to matter to us just probably shouldn't matter to us anymore. I think there's going to be a lot of silver linings of this situation, where we realize that a lot of the petty disagreements we had on Twitter about, this political view or that religious view or that, this and that and the other, just does not, it just seems petty now. We might realize just how petty so much of it was, and unfortunately it takes these kind of event for that to happen. Human history has shown that to be the case, and even social psychology experiments where you have camp groups that you put into groups and they hate each other just because they're in different groups, and then they give them a common enemy, and suddenly they cooperate together. So.
Wow, Scott, that really triggers something else.
I hope I triggered you in a good way.
Oh, in a very good way of I've had on many levels such a reaction to the protesters out there who are protesting the isolation right now. And I think it's because I think within New York City and many other places, there is such a feeling that we're all in this together. At 7 p.m. when we all go out and we clap, and so much of the country, I think we have come together. And I think, I want people to be able to dissent and express their views. But I think part of the protesting is it takes away from that feeling that for a moment, we're all sailing together.
Right. We have a guest on who's a colleague at NYU who asked us, how long will this togetherness last? And one can only hope, and there are so many different factors that come into play. But for the time being, it's so, I love the way that you use the boat and the sail, Scott, which is core to the book. For those of you who have read it, but the idea that, the boat keeps us safe, and the sail is something we can expand and try to, I'm doing a horrible job of explaining it.
No, not at all. Not at all. That was good. I do want to give the message to people, though, that we must not forget to neglect our higher possibilities, even under these circumstances. I mean, Viktor Frankl, who was in the concentration camps, noted that even under the most dire circumstances, there was still joy at moments. When the guards weren't there, they were like, okay, now let's find the games and play the games till the guards come back. There's still so much that we can do and drive in our lives that are not circumstantial. There is that great Frankl quote, the last of the human freedoms we have is the ability to choose in the moment how we want to think about a situation.
Right. I mean, it seems like our ability to, our opportunities to choose are more important than they have been in a long time right now.
Yeah, and that can be a good thing in a lot of ways. It helps you really like zoom in on what really matters in your life. I'm doing a lot of that lately. I'm thinking of quitting this whole psychology thing and becoming a stand-up comedian, for instance.
I don't think you're allowed to use the word Zoom anymore outside of the word Zoom. I think it's been trademarked.
Actually, Scott, have you told your father about this potential
no.
development in your career? Because he's sitting right there. He doesn't look shocked, but maybe it's just because you've always been, always kept him on his toes. I'm
scrolling quickly to see if I can find my dad's reaction. Where is he?
He has the smile that he always has in his face, which is warm and loving and accepting and beautiful. So I just, there it is.
We have a famous comedian in our family, Joey Bishop, who was one of the Rat Pack members. And so he was always an inspiration to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was a huge tangent. But I guess what I'm saying is it is important to use this time to really think through, what are the things what are the things what are the shoulds? This is a Karen Horney thing as well. She called them the tyrannical shoulds. What were all the things I was doing in my life that were just tyrannical shoulds? And I thought of some, actually. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore. There'd be times that maybe I would say something on Twitter because I felt like I should say it. Like it'll virtue signal, like make me look good, if I say something, but I don't really believe it. Now I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to say what I really believe now. And I mean, don't worry. I don't think all hell's going to break loose now. I still thankfully think good things. But I'm saying there are some things I'm realizing that, life is, we realize in these kinds of moments just how short life is and how much self-actualization is a matter of putting into clarity and view the things that bring us the most meaning in life and the things that matter the most to us and putting us wholeheartedly into that, our whole self into that. We can't put our whole self into everything.
Every time someone is taken off a ventilator at Bellevue Hospital, they play on the loudspeaker, "Don't Stop Believin'" by Journey. And it is every time that happens, I pause. Everybody in all of our separate rooms at Bellevue Hospital, we all pause. And a smile comes over you and you feel unbelievably connected by the music. And that idea of us all using this moment to pause and think about what are the shoulds. Probably for me, that pops in my head of a should that I should be doing some work instead of being with my kids or my family or my friends or a loved one. And that has really brought this home. I think that's a wonderful thing, a gift to everybody on this call of thinking about what are the shoulds. You actually said, Scott, so many wonderful things on this call.
Yeah, we could go on and on. And, we could go on and on and on. As we joked before the call even started. But what we had here was just so beautiful and meaningful. And hopefully people are walking away with an idea for themselves. There's so many factors that seem to come into self-actualization, and you raised so many of them, whether it's dealing with dark sides or working working to nurture well-being. You gave us so many great next steps. So thank you. By the way, if everyone here, not to plug it, but Scott's book is a whole appendix of full of exercises, which is terrific because it allows you brought up in the beginning the video game idea. No two ways of self-actualization are the same. And so to find the ones that work for you and to have that as a resource is fantastic. To have you as a resource today has been brilliant. So thank you so much for being here. By the way, I just want to mention for everyone here, Scott has, and he made reference to, I should have before, the Psychology Podcast. How he secured that name, I have no idea. But it is a wonderful podcast. It is Scott every week being Scott and bringing on amazing people. So please, I encourage you to go there. Go to his website, find him. He will he changes people's lives, and for the better.
So do you guys.
Oh,
so
go on.
No.
Fishing or anything. So, by the way, speaking of people who do so, we've been really fortunate to have this lovely group of folks who come on, and so far everyone knows each other quite well, and that includes next week. We're so fortunate to welcome Emily Esfahani-Smith, whose book, The Power of Meaning, it was published a few years ago and is so pertinent. She actually wrote a really lovely op-ed in the New York Times last week about the importance of meaning in overall well-being. She's a very special human being. So we get to welcome her next week, next Wednesday at 5 p.m. And we hope you will join us there. Keep your eyes peeled for our email. You can register at thecramecenter.org. We'll have an image after this is over. It will send you right to the registration for Emily as well if you hang on for a few seconds. And so again, we want to thank the Krame Center for making this possible today. We want to again encourage you to go to No Kid Hungry, which is the foundation we're associated with, and give if you are able right now, even something small to give to those kids who are really struggling to even find the basics, such as food. And just to remind you that every Wednesday at 5, we're here, whether things are going well for you or things are really challenging for you, whether it is meaning like next week, self-actualization like this week, meditation like in the past. We're here just to try to make your life a little bit better. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you so much, Scott. You have been amazing.
Thanks so much, Scott.
Yeah, and
Thank you so much for having me on. Thanks to everyone for joining in and spending this hour of your life with us. It was so much fun.
Flew by like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Could you save take care, everyone? Dan, can you save the chat? I'd love to sit back some.
We'll jump off, and then we'll jump back on another Zoom right now.
Because I think there's a way to save like the chat log.
We got it all.
You know what I'm,
Catherine, is it just us on now?
Nope. We're going to jump off. We'll jump back on in a second.